All right, hi everyone, and welcome to Echoes from the Past. This is a space in which we discuss perspectives on history, religion, anti-Semitism, intolerance, issues like these, with an emphasis on the Holocaust. On this Substack site, you will find historical essays, articles on current events, interviews like the one that you're watching right now. If you have been finding Echoes from the Past content compelling, would you please consider subscribing? You can do so by scrolling below the video when you're done watching. Paid subscribers get exclusive access to full interviews like this one and also to research-based essays. If you can't afford a paid subscription or just it's not in your budget to do so, you haven't signed up yet for a free subscription, would you please consider doing so today? You'll have access to plenty of free content, including thought-provoking essays on contemporary issues, generous free previews of interviews like this one, and also free previews of the research-based pieces. And I thank you for your support. Today, we have a special guest with us once again during this regular feature. This is the May 2026 installment of our interview feature, where I interview authors, scholars, and educators and museum professionals. We have Jack L. High with us today. Jack is a New York Times best-selling author of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist. Let me hold up my copy here. There you are. That's what the cover looks like. The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, Hermann Goering, Dr. Douglas M. Kelly, and A Fatal Meeting of Minds at the End of the Second World War. This is the book upon which the 2025 film Nuremberg with Russell Crowe and Rami Malek was based. Um, Jack writes nonfiction books, long-form narratives, and the free monthly newsletter Damn History. What a good title. That's a fun title, Jack.
Thank you.
Damn History newsletter. This is for writers and readers of popular history. His other published books include The Lobotomist, a maverick medical genius and his tragic quest to rid the world of mental illness, Face in the Mirror, and the forthcoming work, The Case of the Autographed Corpse, a medicine man and a mystery writer in pursuit of justice. Welcome to the channel, Jack. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, Chris. Thanks so much for inviting me to be here with you and with your audience.
Yeah, thank you so much again for doing it. We were talking off camera here about the weather in Minneapolis, where you're based, and how lovely it was, and how the tulips are blooming. And we had some of that earlier this week, but today it's one of those sort of gray, rainy days, and I feel like I'm back in London today. It's 60 something degrees and rainy.
Well, it's
Um,
springtime. That's part of the package.
It is part of the package,
Mm.
right? April is one of those months. It's coming to a close now. By the time this interview is published, it'll be May. Um, but yeah. Right. So it's nice to meet you. Again, Jack, it's a privilege and a pleasure to be speaking with you. And let's get into it, shall we?
Okay, I'm ready.
All
Anything
right.
you want to throw at me?
All right. These are not going to be hardball questions, okay? I think it's just meant to stoke
Mm,
our conversation since we don't know each other well. Oh, we don't know.
mm.
We're just getting to know each other now. So, Jack, you're the author of more than a dozen books and a bunch of other publications. I think I read hundreds of articles, if I read that correctly.
Yes.
Um, you also, I understand, do some public speaking. Is there such a thing as an average week in the life of author Jack L. High? And if so, what might it look like?
In my average week, some people are surprised to find there's plenty of drudgery because
Sure.
the kind of research and writing I do is solitary and it
Hmm.
involves combing through all kinds of mainly archival materials
Yeah.
that have been sitting in storage boxes for a very long time. Sometimes I work in university or institutional archives, and sometimes I'm working with private collections of materials, as I did with the Nazi and the Psychiatrist. The work that the materials that were the foundation for that book were in the hands of the family of Dr. Douglas Kelly and hadn't been seen by anybody since 1946, anybody outside the family. So
Yeah.
I do a lot of that drudgery work. I do, as you said, I love to speak and give presentations all over the place. I love talking to book clubs. I do that as well, mainly here in the Twin Cities area. So there's a lot of variety to it.
Yeah, and I can see that based on the titles from your books. I've just read, and I'm a full disclosure guy. I've read half of The Nazi and the Psychiatrist, and apologies for that. I wanted to get through the whole thing. And let me just tell my viewers and listeners, this is nothing. This is a page turner. Okay, this has to do with my schedule and how many things I'm like you, Jack, that I'm juggling. And I also appreciate, you noted the drudgery part, right? Just the putting your nose to the grindstone. And as a historian, trying to get my second book finally done, you are talking about going and looking through materials, and depending on the language. In my case, I'm translating a lot of documents from the German language into English, and there is a lot of legwork involved, a lot of detail-oriented stuff, right?
Yes, and a lot of it, as you alluded, requires what an early writing teacher of mine, Frank Daniel, referred to as Sitzfleisch, which in German and Yiddish means something like ass skin or ass flesh. And it just means
Mhm.
sitting down in the chair and
Yeah.
doing it. That's a big part of it.
Yeah, it's so true. Because one might be tempted to think, especially based on the fact that you've got a book that now, what, some 10, 12 years after its publication, has gotten a whole lot of airplay, in part because of the film, which we'll get to. But there is a lot. I love that. There's drudgery involved. You're a man of words too, right? That came out in your book. You've got a way with words, which someone like me who is just a professionally trained historian, I'm trying to get better at being a writer, so that when people pick up my books, they're and essays, they're interested in reading on. That's part of the Substack channel as well, is
Right.
doing more
Well,
of that.
that's an interesting point, Chris. I don't call myself a historian because I don't have academic training in history. My background's in journalism,
Yeah.
and instead, I call myself a history writer. I like writing narratives that are rooted in history, and I do like doing the archival and other historical research work. But there is a difference between the two approaches.
Sure, it's true. And having said that, I want to commend you for, as I was going, as you might imagine, as a historian, right? The rest of the world doesn't do this. We flip to the back, right? We look at the right. We look at the notes. We look at the bibliography, and I was like, yeah, there's Richard Overy. There is
Mhm.
on almost like every other page I was reading, you are quoting from, citing the archival stuff. A lot of it's from, from the stuff that you got access to from the Kelly family. So it's just so fascinating. So Jack, what drew you to the work, and what does it all mean to you personally? Why do you enjoy doing it? And if so, why?
I began writing about history really early on in my writing career, and this was in the mid to late 1980s. And I started writing history articles for regional magazines here in Minnesota.
Hmm.
And I was drawn to it because I've always liked it. I've always liked that kind of material, but also I saw that by and large it wasn't being done well for magazines. And many of the history based pieces I saw in magazines were not all that interesting, not very well written, and were not developing their narratives as stories, not
Right.
thinking about characterization, not using historically based material like letters and trial transcripts, etc., as dialogue, all of that.
Yeah.
And, I am a big believer in works like this being 100% factual, nothing invented,
Hmm.
nothing imaginatively made up. It's all factual. But there is a way of writing it that for general readers brings it to life. And that's what I was inspired to do after reading many history articles in magazines that were not doing that. That's how I began. And my first book like this was The Lobotomist in 2005.
How fascinating. Yeah, and I really appreciate that approach, um, that attention to historical detail. It's so important. And like I said, again, I sort of envy the ability to, to spin a yarn, right? But with not some tall tale, but with the material that one has. And of course, history is about, I think a lot of people don't get this sometimes. History really is about interpretation, right? By which I mean that historians and history writers shouldn't just make up an interpretation, but it should be credible. It should be based on the facts in front of them. But it's also, I can't remember who it was, which interview I talked with another colleague about this. It should be based on what one is seeing in the sources. It should be credible. And yet, Jack, you might approach, not just because of our differences in vocation, you might come to the subject of Goering and Kelly. Let's say I wrote a book on Goering and Kelly. I'm not going to do that. I generally focus more on so-called bystanders or implicated subjects, people who are, not Nazi criminals. But having said that, I might ask different questions, right? I might be less interested in one aspect or another than you might, right?
Exactly. There could be 100 different books written about Goering and Kelly. And the way I shape mine to be the kind of book that's of interest to me is that I usually begin, or it develops as I start my research, with two or three guiding questions.
Yeah,
And those are what lead me forward. I may not find the answers to all of those questions in the course of the work, but they're at least guiding me to where I want to go. And
yeah,
in the case of the Nazi and the psychiatrist, the guiding questions were number one, what did Douglas Kelly actually find after his work with
yeah,
the Nazis? At the very beginning, that was not exactly clear to me. And then another guiding question, I may reveal a bit of a spoiler here, but what precisely was the connection between the suicides of Hermann Goering and Douglas Kelly? They
yeah,
both took their own lives 12 years apart
yeah,
using the exact same method of cyanide poisoning. And that really intrigued me, puzzled me, and I wanted
yeah,
to get to the bottom of it.
yeah. So fascinating. All right, so let's get into it. Let's get into the Nazi and the psychiatrist. Um, can you tell us just briefly, Jack, what is the book about? We sort of, hinted at this a little bit, and how you came to write it.
Sure. The Nazi and the Psychiatrist covers the life of Dr. Douglas M. Kelly, a psychiatrist, with a big emphasis on the time he spent as working among the German war crimes defendants in Nuremberg, in the very first of the 13 Nuremberg trials. This is the International Military Tribunal. And so the people on trial here were the very top German leaders, military and civilian, who had been arrested at that point. And so it included, as we mentioned, Hermann Goering, Rudolf Hess, and 20 others. And Kelly had been working, he was a member of the U.S. Army during the war and had been working in field hospitals in Western Europe, mainly treating soldiers who suffered from what today we would call PTSD as a result of their combat. And so at the end of the war, he was close by, and the tribunal wanted a psychiatrist to evaluate these 22 defendants to see if they fit the legal standard of mental fitness for trial.
Right.
Quite a low bar. It meant could they understand the charges against them and participate in their defense.
Yeah.
And this, for Kelly, was quite accomplished, even though he was only 33 years old at this time. And he set out for himself, without sanction of the court or the prison or anyone else, a more ambitious project to also work on. And that was to determine whether these defendants suffered from a shared psychiatric disorder that would account for their crimes
Hmm.
and behaviors. So he spent a total of about 8 months before and then about 6 weeks after the trial started among these men, studying them. He gave them a battery of tests, and he also interviewed them extensively, particularly Goring, and came to his conclusions, which we can discuss if you'd like, and then returned to the States in January 1946 and resumed his life. But it was now on a completely different trajectory because of problems that developed for Dr. Kelly as a result of his time in Nuremberg and other personal problems. And so the book follows his life to the very end. He died at the age of 45 in 1958. And so while my book covers these 45 plus years, the movie, Nuremberg, covers about 18 months
Right.
of time when Kelly was there among the defendants and a little bit of time afterwards.